Last week we asked whether you literally are, in some way, the things that you post on the internet. Let's see what you had to say. Julesabear on the subreddit wrote a really great comment about the experience of being a fur and how there's this kind of negotiation that happens between you and your intentions for your identity and the kind of shared assumptions that people have about the things that you might base that identity on. Like, we have these ideas about what certain animals are and how they behave, and you might choose to accept or not accept some of those things, and you might find it kind of creating this shifting sense or this shifting portrait of identity, which is an idea that I really like. But then they also go on to talk about the existence and the idea of otherkin, which is a thing that I really don't know that much about. And I think, a lot like furs on the internet, there's a lot of misrepresentation about otherkin, what they kind of intend to be, what they are. So yeah, this was just very interesting to read. Thank you for writing it. It's a great comment. Also, Julesabear, credit where credit is due. Last week's episode was definitely in part inspired by me being made fun of for posting something of like a photo of a fox and saying that it was literally me, and then being accused of being a furry. So that started me down a whole line of thinking that, Julesabear, if that was you, you can have a producer credit on last week's episode. Bob the Man 1Y writes a really great comment about the distinction between self-expression and self-construction. And this is something that I definitely could have spent more time on in the episode, or really, I guess, any time on, because I think that this is a really important point. And from my perspective, I think maybe one of the things that I was trying to get at, and this I think also relates to Clear and Sweet's comment, is that there might be a distinction between the two, but they are also, I think, very, very related in the process of becoming oneself, and that one's self-construction might organize their self-expression, but is also kind of organized by it. That, I really do think that it is a two-way street, and that in some way, a fair amount of your self-expression is experimenting with your self-construction and sort of seeing what fits. But I don't know, that comes from someone with an infinite supply of armchairs. And actually, Bitcoon's comment sort of relates to this long string of things, which is, talking about how you might have these aspirations for yourself, and so you can put together an identity that is in some way a performance of the thing that you are interested in being, but then you start to actually adopt some parts of it, but also recognize that it is not some monolithic expression of you, that it is not meant to stand in every situation for who you are, but that does not make it wholly and completely not you in some way, that it is still part of yourself and part of your identity. And so, thank you a bit for writing this comment. I hope you don't mind that I sort of made an example of you. I thought this was a great comment. Etienne Domingue writes a really great comment about how my representation of McLuhan's ideas sort of leave out some of the background, which is that, McLuhan was writing more of like a warning isn't really the right word. He was encouraging people to be more critical, because media has a lot of power. Media and technology has a lot of power, and amongst the power that it has is that to sort of furnish us with feelings and ideas and attitudes and orientations and politics and all this other stuff. And so when we're using media and technology to construct ourselves, it's important to be cognizant of the fact that we are doing so with things distributed and controlled by other people. And I think that there's if you don't go down the road where you're like, well, this is dangerous and bad, you should at least go down the road of like, well, we're talking about your construction of yourself and who you are, and so it's important to know what materials you're using, and also interesting. And so, I think that there was definitely some nuance missing in my representation of McLuhan's ideas in last week's episode. So great point. I am literally flabbergasted that was the case. Entropy Curse writes a really great comment that mentions the idea of triviality, which I think, I did not give, and generally don't give, nearly enough play when talking about how we put together ourselves, and that lots of the things that we might say, like literally me or same or GPOI about, are maybe meant to express some level of meaning as it relates to some deeper idea of us, but mostly it's, a lot of times it's just this, these tiny feelings. And when you add them all up, you can see how maybe there are some themes that run throughout for one person, but that for the most part, it's about these things that are hard or maybe unnecessary to describe or explain otherwise. And this also relates to the couple comments that I saw about relatability, right? That like relatable content has some place in this conversation as well. Both phostex and Dezmond Finney asked this really important question about whether or not this means we are the words that we use. Because if we're allowing that we are constructing some sense of our identity using images, does it mean that we also do that when we speak or when we use, text-based language? And I think to a certain degree we have to allow that we are, that is the case. But I do agree with this sense that it does seem a little bit more complicated or a little bit more fraught. Maybe that's because of the walk from pictorial representation to self seems a little bit shorter because, there are actual depictions of selves in some form or another in these images, whereas in text, there's that additional level of abstraction that you have to work through. And so I like the way phostex puts it that, it might not be literally you, but it is always literally an approximation of you. And, I think that there's some beauty in this kind of admitting the complicated nature and levels of abstraction that we're talking about. But yeah, this is definitely an important part of this conversation. But wait, Cecile, I'm literally this video, so does that mean that two people can literally be, you know what? We've abused the word literally enough that, yeah, sure, let's just go for it. We'll both literally be that video. Everybody's invited. Everybody's literally the video.